Hello, and welcome to the Emotional Expedition podcast. I'm Meg Thomas, and if you want to live a more open-hearted, magical life, it all starts with your emotions. This podcast will take you on a journey, helping you to better understand, express, release, and heal your emotions. Let's get exploring. Welcome back to the Emotional Expedition podcast, and I am here with a very special guest, and I was lucky enough to have been asked to be on her podcast, so I'm so happy that she said yes to being on my podcast, Amanda Bullat, and she is the host of Savor Food and Body podcast. She helps women in midlife undiet their lives with intuitive eating and mindfulness, which I am sure there is a lot of overlap of how emotions play into all that. So I'm sure we are going to get into that today. And over the past 2 decades, Amanda has navigated her own food and body liberation journey. After a successful competitive running career, she went on to recover from a disordered relationship with food and exercise, and her recovery allowed her to earn a master's degree in nutrition and dietetics. She's honored to serve as a guide and a mentor to her clients, partnering with them to help heal their relationship with food and their body through simple, specific strategies based on the principles of intuitive eating, health at every size, and her unique savor strategies of healing, which I'm sure she's going to share with us. So welcome, Amanda. How are you today?
Oh, thanks, Meg. I'm great. I'm so excited that we're continuing the conversation that we started on the Savor Food and Body podcast. And like we mentioned in that episode, there's so much overlap between emotions and food and intuition in general and our work, the work that you do with clients, the work that I do with clients. And we both love Brene Brown's work. So we're meant to continue our conversation in this space.
Totally. Let's go back to the beginning. So as a child, were you intuitive? Because I see a lot of that language on your website, and I think of my own journey with my intuition, and many of it has come from not following my intuition to now being like, okay, it was always there, but I was not listening to it. So what was your relationship like with your intuition?
Yeah, it's a great question. As a kid, I don't think we think about it in those words, of course. And in reflecting back on it though, and this is a term I use with my clients too, which now having learned from you and some of our other colleagues in this space, I realize there's a more technical term, but I would have identified myself as a super feeler.
Mm-hmm.
Also now I'm blanking on the term of what we call it now, like hypersensitive, or it could even be on the ADHD, well, not necessarily on the ADHD spectrum, but just highly sensitive. And I've used the term super feelers for that too. So I think as a kid, that was me, and I didn't really know what to do with that. And, I had a great childhood, great parents, things like that, but they weren't necessarily intuitive to feelings, or if they were, or I suspect maybe my dad was more, but not my mom. And so feelings just weren't really talked about in our household. It definitely wasn't a neglect situation where you're like, okay, go play, go sort yourself out by any means. But when I think about what some of my clients have experienced and the trauma related to emotional regulation as a kid, I definitely did not have any issues there. Really grateful for that. But I also wasn't necessarily taught how to key into I'm feeling X, Y, and Z in my body, or how to express those emotions. I don't have any memory of being with either one of my parents and them having a very intentional conversation around like, hey, what just happened after I'm exploding in a tantrum or tears or fell off my bike or, whatever. I just don't remember any of those interactions in that way with my folks. But I do remember just feeling a lot, and especially going through middle school, going through puberty, just really feeling a lot in my body and not understanding that that's okay, and still kind of feeling like, God, what is wrong with me? Why? As one example, I think I was probably a junior in high school, and I gave myself, I mean, I wasn't diagnosed by a doctor, but like a stomach ulcer or an ulcer of some kind, because I was so nervous and intense for one of my very good friends to go compete at the state level in pole vaulting. And I really wanted to be there for him, and I really wanted to see him do a good job. And I just got this really like acidy, burning sensation in my stomach, and it messed up my whole day. I had to go home sick. I was like, I don't understand what's wrong with me. And my mom didn't understand what was wrong with me. And, eventually it went away, no problem, after my body finally relaxed. But I didn't have any idea. We just thought, oh, it was something I ate. We just got kind of passed off. And, fast forward 25, 30 years since then. And I'm like, oh, that's what was going on then. I was really feeling the feels for what he was going to experience going to compete at state. And I got my stomach in a knot, literally, in a pretty bad way, to the fact that I had to go home from school. So that's like one really poignant experience that I remember of like, oh, that was my version of being a super feeler. And that's how it played out in my body. And now, knowing what I know and the work that I do, I can connect those dots. But at that time, I was like, what's wrong with you? Why do you have a stomach ache?
That's so wild that it wasn't even your competition. Just shows how sensitive you were and empathic you were to the people around you. And I think many of us have these experiences, but don't draw that conclusion, can't see it for that we're impacted energetically with the people around us if we don't know how to take care of ourselves in those ways.
Right. Or we're taught that, oh, that's super weird. That's super woo woo. Like that's theirs. What's yours? I mean, I use that term all the time with my clients, but more coming from a place of, hey, don't take on what you can't actually do something about. We get that you're feeling it in your body, and we get that you're having these strong reactions. But again, can we pull the lens back and say, is it really your responsibility to fix what's going on with this person? Or is it going to serve you better to stay in your body and resource yourself so that you can support this person in another way? So now I kind of do that blending of acknowledging we feel these things in our body based on someone else's experience or what they're going through. And we're not going to be able to help them if we try to just not ignore our body and go into complete like fixer mode for whatever they're going through. So that phrase of what's yours and what's theirs comes up a lot in my work, alongside acknowledging we feel the feels as super feelers for things that are going on in our life and other people's lives.
Were you an athlete from a young age? And being a runner, I just want to understand more, because sometimes you talk to people who are really athletic and it was almost a disconnection from their body versus a connection. And sometimes it's the other way. So I would love to hear as you grew up, when did running come into your life? What did that look like? And was it a moment of being in body or more of a moment of being out of body?
It's a little bit of both for me, I think. Although as we talk about this, I might say, no, it was all out of body. But, I was not an athletic kid at all. The only reason I got into running, honestly, was because of diet culture. I got tired of being teased for being the fat kid. And it wasn't super implicit at me, or it wasn't directed at me, like the comments or anything like that completely. the comments kind of circled around me. I mean, especially going through puberty, I just developed faster than my peers, than my classmates, than my friends. And so I stood out in my third grade class. And so I internalized my body's not okay. And as I went into like sixth grade, junior high, that really key puberty development time, and people are developing at different rates, and having this messaging of I'm not okay, I learned like, okay, well, if I learn how to be a runner, and we had the horrific presidential fitness tests, so that played into this too, where we had to run I don't know what it was. It wasn't quite a half mile. It was like 600 meters or something like that, whatever the test was. And this was sixth grade. And so my dad helped me really from a place of, I wanted to survive it. I didn't want to just be the last kid on the field, like making my laps and have everybody laugh at me. And like, case in point, oh, she's the fat kid and she can't finish the test, blah, blah, blah. So my dad helped me like be a better runner, but it was really, and from his standpoint, or as I remember, it was really from a place of, it wasn't that I needed to lose weight per se. He just wanted to see me be better and feel more comfortable doing the tests so that I wouldn't be picked on. But that kind of snowballed into, again, not necessarily coming from my folks, but it snowballed into the rest of the culture. My body didn't really change that much by trying to be a better runner in sixth grade. It really wasn't until high school when my parents, again, well-intending, they signed me up to be a part of the high school cross country team, mostly of just, here's a way to meet some people. And I played piano and things like that at the time too, and I did recitals, but piano, let's be honest, is kind of a solo activity unless you're doing duets or something like that, which I wasn't doing that and didn't really have access to playing with other student musicians or anything like that. So they just thought, well, in starting high school, I was now going to be around all these other kids filtering in from all the other junior highs and areas of where we live that I wouldn't have gone to school ever with those kids, because I went to a pretty far out elementary school that then as we progressed in school, we started to filter into a bigger populated area. So I joined the cross country team and had a good time. They were really great, met some great people, had some fun. But again, my freshman year, I was the last one finishing everything. So I was like, okay, I feel like I'm trying this, but I feel like I really suck at it. What is wrong with me? And so it wasn't until that time that then I started to try to connect the dots between running and how much I eat. And it really kind of started planting those seeds of disordered eating tied to, I want to be a better runner because these are really cool people to hang out with. And I don't want to be embarrassed by being the last person finishing the races. And so there's part of that super feeler part of me too. I had a lot of anxiety around all this in my freshman year of high school. And so going into sophomore, junior, senior year, we had a different coach and created a little bit better community aspect of the team versus just focusing on times and personal records and all of that, which my freshman year coach was more on that side of the spectrum. And so it became more than about just being fast. It became more about being with people that I enjoyed hanging out with. So it kind of started from this place of my body's not okay. I need to fix it with exercise.
Yep.
And then it morphed into, oh, these are kind of some cool people to hang out with. I want to keep doing that. And it is more fun when I'm not huffing and puffing and I'm the last one. So I'll put in the time over the summertime to, do my home workouts and things like that. And then my body did start to change, but really not until college. And my sophomore year in college is when I dropped a lot of weight while I was living over in Europe. And I had taken my running to the next level and deciding to run marathons. And coming back from that academic year abroad, then that's where I got a lot of validation for my body changing, because now I was no longer the round runner, the round little kid.
Mm-hmm.
Now I was in this adult woman's body that was at least somewhat closely resembling the body ideal, or at least the athletic body ideal. And I was fast. I was one of the fastest runners in my town and winning races and all of this stuff. So I got a lot of validation for, again, keep pushing myself as a runner and manipulating food so I can stay in this body to be this fast runner. So at that point, then it became more about what am I running away from? And the running became more of a disassociation. And I was disassociating from the discomfort of being in a culturally unacceptable body and the fear of, if I stop running, I'm going to gain a bunch of weight again. And then I'm not going to be acceptable like I was when I was a kiddo. And I was made fun of as a kiddo, and I don't want to be that. So here, let's have an eating disorder instead. Let's do it that way. I mean, I didn't think about it in those terms, but that's really what was happening. So I wouldn't say like really anywhere along the line was running part of being embodied. It was definitely more about either changing my body or running away from the discomfort, the fear of, well, what happens if my body goes back to the way that it was?
Wow. Thank you for sharing. I can already see how the emotions are starting to play in this. And I know Brene talks about it in Atlas of the Heart, and I think in Braving the Wilderness as well, this concept of belonging versus fitting in. And so what I'm hearing you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is these were all ways of you fitting in, but it wasn't true belonging, because there was also this part of you that had this fear of, if I don't do this, or if my body changes, will I still be a part of this club? Will I still be a part of this group? Will this still be, who am I without this part of my identity? Did it feel like fitting in versus true belonging?
You know, I would say, especially in college, yes. And after college, when I was a faster runner, I think in high school, it was more about fitting in.
Mm-hmm.
I had a really great time with those teammates, and it's one of my fondest memories of growing up, of being on that team and with the new coach that we got that facilitated more of that camaraderie spirit between us. So I don't ever remember feeling like if I got, because, well, I guess that's it. In high school, I started off and I was as slow as you were going to be. So I only had up to go from there. So I had already experienced, I am the last one. And so as high school progressed, I became the one that was fitting in. And as my running got better, I still wasn't, I mean, I was on varsity, but I was not one of the fastest people on the team. I wasn't going to state or anything like that. But I became, at least I could keep up with everybody. I could, keep up in the workouts. I could do the races and then still have a pizza party at night with, friends and watching movies or something. And so I felt like my body could participate in a very full way. And so that was, I would say, more about belonging. I liked belonging to this group of people.
Yeah.
And later, through the transformation that happened in Europe, when I lived in Europe for the year, and then coming back, then because I came back at such a different body size and fitness level and a better quality athlete, I was able to walk on the team of a Division I, NCAA Division I team when I got back to my home university. And so that was more about, I'm trying to belong to this, but I have a fear that if I lose my edge, I lose my competitive edge, I won't belong to this world anymore.
Yeah.
I won't belong to the world of being an elite athlete.
Mm-hmm.
If I stop eating the way that I'm eating or not eating, if I stopped doing the crazy, workouts that I was doing. I won't get into how many miles a week I was running, but it was an obscene amount for someone who is in their early 20s who should be socializing and going out and maybe, meeting your lifelong friends and maybe even your partner. And I wasn't doing any of that. Like if a guy couldn't keep up with me on a 20-mile run, we were not going anywhere together.
So your pool was very small. I'm guessing your pool to select.
I didn't have a pool.
Yeah, there wasn't even.
There was no pool.
Nobody was keeping up.
I was not going to the college parties. I was getting up the next morning and, like I say, running 20 miles.
How did your emotions play into that at that time? Were you connected to them? Were you disconnected from them?
I mean, in a way, I was starting to become more connected to being an independent person versus doing what you're supposed to do at that age group, in that age. So in a way, my fierce independent streak now was kind of starting to be solidified there. Now, granted, it was coming from a disordered place back then because I was afraid, like, if I didn't get up and run those miles the next morning, then I was going to lose my competitive edge and I was going to gain weight and all of that. However, when I think back on it, that part of that mindset was also I generally enjoyed running. I enjoyed being able to say that while everybody was sleeping off their hangovers, I look at what my body accomplished and look at the sights that I saw today. I saw the sunrise come up over Mount Hood, or I saw the first, spring trilliums opening up in Forest Park. And I ran to the top of this steep hill that I could see, like, west of Portland, and I could see east of Portland, like I say, looking out at the mountains. And everybody else was still in bed or shuffling around in their too big sweats and fleece slippers trying to get food at the dining commons and not pass out on the way. So I wouldn't have traded any of those experiences that I had.
Yeah.
When I think about my life now and, like, some of my friends or classmates at the time, and now they've been in marriages for almost 20 years and they have kids and all of that, I'm like, I missed all of that. But there was a bit of a choice that came with missing that, because I wouldn't have traded the experiences that I had with being that elite athlete for anything.
Yeah.
So I was connected to those emotions of, I like that I accomplished this. And was I afraid of not playing into diet culture in terms of body size and athleticism? Yes. But I also, so it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I also have a lot of gratitude for the experiences that I had by being that level of an athlete too. And a lot of pride for it too. You can see, well, people on the podcast can't see this, but there is a very large wood carved eagle behind me. And that's the top part of a trophy that I won in winning a marathon. So that's very proud of that. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't pushed my body to that extent and made some what people might have called sacrifices, but I didn't think about them as sacrifices at the time. Sacrifice my bone health maybe and my reproductive health because I didn't have a period for 7 years. But so a little bit of mixed bag with emotions.
I love so much that you're sharing the paradox of it, that you're sharing the both, the and, that there were things you were getting out of it and there were things you were giving up in order to have this experience. So it's really, really powerful. When did you realize you were participating in this disordered eating?
Yeah, honestly, probably not until I shifted into being more interested in nutrition and going on to get my master's degree in nutrition and dietetics, because my first degree is in history, which is why I think I love the like psychology, social science side of nutrition and people's relationship with food and their stories with food in their body. I don't think that I recognize that I had a disordered relationship with food in my body until obviously my parents started to become really concerned because I had gotten to such a small body. And one of my prerequisite professors for nutrition, her husband happened to be a high school cross country coach, and she was a dietitian. And she knew why I was taking these prereqs because I wanted to get into this master's program. And she knew that I was a runner because I was doing my prerequisites still in my hometown. And she said, I'm just curious, why do you want to be a dietitian? And I told her, I'm like, well, I really like healthy living and healthy eating. And, healthy eating has been really cornerstone to my athletic success and stuff. She said, well, you realize that at the time, it's like about 30% of this profession, dietitians, have an eating disorder. Do you realize that? And I was like, oh, no. She's like, so I just want to check in what are your motivations for becoming a dietitian? Because you're going to learn how to ride that pretty fine line between calculating all the calories, calculating the macros, all of this. So is having that knowledge going to be helpful for you? And she didn't say relationship with food at the time because we weren't using that language at the time. But that's really what she was getting at. And I was like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Whatever. It's fine. I just want to be a dietitian. And then around that same time, I was getting ready for another marathon, and I was trying really hard to just convince everybody else around me that was going, Amanda, I think there's something wrong. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm an athlete. This is just what we do. So I went to a physiology lab to get my VO2 max measured and body fat percentage measured in a very sophisticated way, to try to show people like, I'm fine. Like, this is just what elite athletes look like. Well, no, not fine. So I did all of the tests, of course, like the VO2 max test, which tests your cardiovascular endurance, really. Of course, I sailed through that. But then when we got to the very high quality body composition testing, and again, we were doing this in like a medical supervised research facility. So this was not the skin calipers or some scale that you stand on or hold or whatever. Like, this was legit testing. And the physiologist, and she'd worked with in Bend, Oregon, where I grew up and where this was all happening, has many elite athletes in it, including Olympians. And so she said, I know you're getting ready for this race in a couple of weeks. She said, if you don't gain X number of pounds in that time, I don't think you're going to finish the race. I think we might have to come and get you on a stretcher. I was like,
wow.
Oh, hold up. She knows what she's talking about. And she's telling me something's wrong. So that was kind of like my catalyst to going, oh, I guess I'm not doing this right. And I still went on, got into grad school. And as I was sitting in my first year of grad school, learning about macronutrients, micronutrients, disease processes and physiology, I even got more confirmation of what I was doing, what I thought was healthy and what I was doing as an athlete was not wrong or was not healthy. It was, and actually wasn't helping me in my sport. And eventually I was going to end up being toast in my sport, which is what happened. I got a chronic injury that from being overtrained and undernourished, and I had to stop running. So it was really getting into grad school that helped me see that science and kind of get me out of my head and have me get into my body at least a little bit more, understanding the science behind what my body was trying to put up with me trying to keep up with diet culture perspective of elite athletes, to go, oh, okay, I think I do need some help getting out of this hole. And that's when I started on eating disorder treatment. I never went to a facility like inpatient or outpatient facility, but I did work with a dietitian and I did work with a licensed mental health counselor to help with the food part and help with the mental health side of eating disorder. And at that time I was I was graduated from undergrad, which is the team that I was running on. So grad school, obviously I wasn't doing that stuff, but I still had a pretty messed up relationship with food and my body, still trying to be that athlete identity. So that's the other piece that's wrapped up into all of this, is like, that's the identity I had created. Yep, that was the identity that I created.
Yes. Yeah. I was wondering about that. So what happens when it's taken? So what happened in that moment of being, your body is telling you physically can't be the athlete you've been for so long? What happened to you emotionally then?
A whole lot of grief. I mean, grief that at that point in my time, I mean, I knew of grief as like, oh, somebody dies and you grieve. I mean, that's, like I said, I didn't really have much emotional training in my growing up. And so, but when I think back on it and the sadness, I'm going to say the word depression, but it was not, to be really clear, it was not clinically diagnosed depression. I don't know, maybe it could have been, but the therapist I was working with at the time, that wouldn't have been her part of her scope of practice. She wasn't a psychologist by any means. But just that feeling of like, I don't know where else to go if I'm not this athlete. And this little bit of fear of still being tied to that community that in Bend, Oregon, it was very athlete driven. And what happens when I come home and I can't run the races anymore, let alone come in first, second, or third in them. I just can't show up, at least in the same way that I used to. And that took a long, long time. I mean, even longer than I could afford to work in therapy. You know, that's a whole nother conversation of like the cost of getting the help that we need.
Yeah.
But, you know, I got enough out of it. And then at that time, because I was in my master's program going on to my dietetic internship, I was at least getting some like professional like training that could kind of help me start putting these dots together of my own story, even though they were coming out of like, hey, how do you help somebody that has this problem with an eating disorder? I was like, oh, yeah, that's me. What do I need to learn?
Case study number 1. I am my own case study. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But even still, you know, when you're going through it, it's hard to kind of pinpoint, you know, that you don't feel well, but it's hard to even name those emotions sometimes. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's so brilliant about Brene Brown's work, having come out since then, and especially Atlas of the Heart, having come out since then, is now we're starting to have conversations that give people language to what are you feeling. I just remember that complete feeling of grief, loss, like loss of connection. I mean, I had lost connection with my body way long time ago before that, but I didn't realize that. And now this other thing that I was connected with, the being a runner, being an athlete, now that was gone. Well, now what am I connected to? At that same time, my parents moved from my childhood home and moved to where they retired to. So I had that loss of connection to my hometown that I grew up with. So that period of my life was really, really hard. There was a lot of loss and grief and shifting and lack of connection and a lot of grasping. And luckily, I didn't end up in like going down some really dark rabbit holes or grasping in other ways, you know, other ways of coping, whether that was alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, food. I mean, to an extent, I mean, yes, there was some emotional eating that started happening, but my body needed that needed that food anyway. Like I needed to gain some weight. I still didn't have a period by that point.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a twixt in between for me. I mean, there was emotional eating for soothing happening out of this whole grief and loss process that I was going through. But at the same time, physiologically, my body needed me to gain those nutrients back and gain that weight back. But that was a huge mindfuck too, of watching my body change and know that I can't physically do anything about it.
So after this time of having this major identity shift, which I think so many people can relate to, even if it's not in the form of being an athlete. If you have a career and you retire or you switch whatever path that is, we have this loss of identity and being faced with that. So after this period of time of you're in the grief, you're experiencing this new way of being, which I imagine was very uncomfortable. Because I know the story about Nepal, when did that happen? When was that in the timeline? And would you share that story with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And that story kind of felt between undergrad and going to grad school. So the Nepal story, which I'll share, kind of happened around that time that I worked with that physiologist and I was taking those prereqs for grad school. And that dietitian said, check me before I wreck myself, sort of thing. And so that's about the time we went to Nepal. So Nepal, my dad and I did a 3-week trek in Nepal. And it was an organized trip that we were going with World Expeditions. And there was a group of 12 of us, I think, altogether. So a small group. And the route that we were doing was called Everest High Passes. So for folks listening, thinking that I climbed Everest, that is not what we're talking about here. But that's what many people associate with going to Nepal and hiking. And no, we weren't climbing Everest. The route we did was called Everest High Passes, which was a bit of a lollipop type loop. And so we were going over these passes to complete this loop. And part of that trip did involve us going up some taller trekking peak and looking over Everest Base Camp. So we were on some pretty rugged trails. The elevation, like being at elevation, is definitely a thing, even if you're not climbing Everest. But the highest point we got to was 18,500 feet. And what was interesting about that trip, and this is a part of the story you haven't heard, Meg, is that so my dad and I were the only 2 people out of 12 that didn't have to take any medication on the trip for high altitude sickness. And yes, I was still kind of trying to run at that time. I wasn't totally convinced that my body was super broken yet at that time, as we remember. And so I thought, okay, yeah, I'm a trained athlete. My dad wasn't. And so we really got to see that this strong genetic component to what our bodies are capable of, especially given a very dramatic environment like Nepal is. And so that I didn't think about that this way, of course, at the time, but talking about body resiliency independent of whatever diet culture says that your body should be able to do. So that's kind of a side note. And where the most impactful part of the Nepal story is we were coming over our last high pass and on our way back down to where we started the trek. And it was a little bit snowy. Some snow had come in the night before, and we had to climb down or hike down this loose rock, kind of some bouldery area. Scree, for folks that are hikers, scree is loose rock. It's definitely not my favorite. And I practically crawl down it I'm a little better at it now, but I definitely need trekking poles and all of this. But at the time in Nepal, I mean, my body was still pretty depleted. And again, I wasn't recognizing it that way. In my head, I was still this trained athlete. But coming down from that pass, at that point, we were probably 2.5 weeks into our trip at high elevation and just a lot of miles that we had done. So my body was pretty tired just from doing that, aside from not being very well nourished going into the trip because of the disordered eating. And as we started down this pass, the guides that were with us had us holding on to climbing ropes. So it was steep enough, and there was a section of the route that we had to go down that we had to down climb from a small cliff. And so there wasn't a path that we were following. We were holding onto these climbing ropes. we weren't harnessed in or like clipped in, as they would say, but those ropes were there to give us some reassurance getting down. And then, of course, the guides were around us in case anybody slipped or fell or anything like that. So as I was down climbing, and what we mean by down climbing usually means you have to turn around and go backwards to like down climb with holding onto the rope, because it's easier to do it that way than trying to go frontwards, especially if you have any vertigo or afraid of heights or anything like that. It's easier to be looking up the mountain and down climb. So that's what we were doing. And I was just so weak and shaking. I mean, I could hold on to the rope, but my anxiety was through the roof. Again, I didn't have that language or that awareness at the time. I just knew that I was super scared because I was feeling so weak, and I didn't understand, like, why am I feeling so weak? Like, I'm this trained athlete. Like, what is wrong with me? And as I got to climb down that little section and got to kind of sort of some stable ground, and I'm standing there with the guide and I'm looking up at this phenomenal scenery. I mean, it wasn't Everest, but it was still the Himalaya that I was looking at. And these mountains were like reach out and touch, really big mountains. Looking at them going, like, I want to keep doing stuff like this. And I don't want to feel weak and frail doing it. And I'm feeling weak and frail right now, even though my dad and I, neither one of us had to take medication for the altitude. So this isn't the altitude. I mean, yes, we've been trekking for a few weeks, but I'm frail because I came into this frail. I'm frail because I haven't been eating enough. I have not been taking care of myself. And it started to kind of click for me, like everything the dietitian had said, the physiologist had said, the concern of my parents, all of this was starting to like click in my brain. I'm like, okay, you thought you were being healthy, but now here you are in an environment that you love more than anything, and you're not sure if you can hold yourself up. That means you're not healthy. That means you're not strong enough to actually do the stuff that you really love to do. Sure, it's fun to be fast, but you don't want to just be running down a paved road for the rest of your life. You want to be doing this stuff. You want to see these mountain views. So I made that vow to myself, looking out at that mountain views, going, okay, I'll do whatever it takes to get strong enough again to play in the mountains like this. And if that means I need to gain weight, if that means I need to eat more, okay, I'll deal with that as it comes. But I want to be able to do more trips like this. I want to be able to do more hikes like this and be a badass mountain woman that can do hikes and climbs like this. So now keep in mind, it still took probably a good another 10 years almost after that, 7 years, to go through that roller coaster of recovery,
healing,
of like watching your body get stronger, watching your body gain weight, freak out that it's not fitting the ideals, all of that. But that was really the linchpin in me realizing that what everybody else had been telling me to that point of like, you're not okay.
Yeah.
And me realizing, but I want to be okay. And I want to be okay because I want to have adventures like this. Yep.
That's such a powerful moment. I'm so glad we got that story in, because very often that's the catalyst for change, is a moment like that, is a moment of enough is enough, or I don't want to feel like this anymore. Whatever that moment is, we almost need to have that kind of moment to really create lasting change. I would love to hear how you help other people fall back in love with their bodies and food and nutrition in this way. And how do you work with clients? What does that process look like? And I'm sure it overlaps with what you learned on your own healing journey of getting to that place. Will you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something that you said earlier about as you were kind of summing up my experience with loss of identity and just that grief and loss of identity as a runner. And if there's one main underlying current that all of my clients over all the years have experienced. There's either this fear of loss of identity, if they have been in a smaller body, and just like I was afraid of losing that smaller body edge, or in more recent years, because I just, started to see the pattern in my practice. I've been working with women in midlife for a long time, even before I was in this age group myself. And so I finally just kind of came to the realization, a handful of years ago, going, oh, I think these are my people. These are the ladies I need to be talking to. And when you think about that loss of identity and that grief, like that's a main thread that goes through all of our food and body work with women through midlife, because they are seeing their bodies change. There's maybe some grief for their younger self or the smaller body that they were in. And my hope is always that we can at least shift that mindset a bit to at least be looking forward to, well, what are the good things that come out of moving through midlife? Is it more independence because your kids are going to be off doing their thing? Is it you finally get to pursue some passions? And what is your Nepal? What is your Himalaya mountains that you want to be doing more of? And how much time have you spent that maybe you were in a smaller body all these years, but how much time and effort and expense did it take you to maintain that if that wasn't your body's genetics? And so a lot of the conversations and how I work with women around this stuff is just acknowledging those emotions, the emotions of grief, the emotions of maybe loss and this change that's happened, but then also hope that we can find some hope and excitement for moving into this next season of life. And one of the main reasons that I do that, and this is a framework that I use in my group counseling programs, is the term savor food and body. Yes, it's the title of my podcast. It's also the tagline of my practice. But savor is actually an acronym for the steps that I walk women through, whether we're doing private one-on-one counseling or, like I said, it's the model, the framework that we walk through in group counseling too. And it stands for start noticing how the messages, the cultural messages from friends, from families, from medical providers, wherever they come from, how do those messages affect how you stay in touch with your body, how they affect your food and movement choices, and just, how you relate to your body. Then the A kind of dovetails onto that, and it's awareness. So you've been asking me and like, hey, what did that feel like in your body? What emotions were you feeling? That's the awareness part. What does it feel like to be in your body that is changing? Sometimes that's pretty cool. Sometimes it's a train wreck in perimenopause. I'll be honest, because I'm going through it too. It's a lot of ups and downs. But if we have awareness around that, then we can take the blame off of ourselves or get rid of the idea that my body's broken or menopause is a disease to be fixed. Like, no, we're not doing any of that. It's a normal stage of life. It is a season of life that we're flowing through. Also an awareness, once we can kind of get the handle on what are we feeling into our body. And one of the basic ways we do that is, what does hunger feel like? What does satisfaction feel like? What does fullness feel like? What is the fullness comfortable fullness, or is it the feeling of like overwhelm and burnout because my whole life is too full, but I'm not necessarily getting the self-nourishment that I need. I'm just spinning my wheels. So we go through all of that. And that leads us into the V, which is variety, and the importance of having a variety of foods, of course, the variety of nutrients that come with that, but also having a variety of self-nourishment practices on a regular basis. And whether that's through movement or mindfulness practices, meditation, yoga, time in nature, connecting with people that mean a lot to you, hobbies, whatever that is. We have to have some of those things in our life so that we don't end up just relying on food for emotional coping or exercise for emotional coping, as was the case in both situations for me. And then the O is options. So then we really drill into like, okay, what options do you have available to you for greater self-nourishment in your life? And how can we start implementing those? So we might talk a little bit about boundaries and how are we going to set some sacred time around you being able to have a walk outside or have 10 minutes with your journal and a cup of tea? What does that look like for you? And then the R is reflect and release. So after we go through all of these steps, and of course, in one-on-one private counseling, like this may take months, to be honest, to go through all of these different strategies and really implement them as you're going through them. And reflect and release means, okay, what have we been doing? What new strategies have we been trying in terms of that variety, in terms of those options? What do you want to keep? What do you want to change? But with any life changes, if you're not doing the reflecting and the releasing, meaning this is not judgment-free zone here. We're not here to judge that you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. Like that's not the point. So we're releasing any judgment from these experiences you're having in terms of shifting through this season of life and shifting into a new dynamic relationship with food in your body. So we're just going to release the judgment, but we are going to reflect on what do you like? What do you want to change? And we're going to continue reflecting because this is a practice. Yeah. This isn't a linear trajectory of like, okay, I had a really crummy relationship with food in my body. I did the savor strategies. Now here I am. I've arrived. You don't arrive. You get better at the practice and maybe your practices get quicker and you get better at being in tuned with your body and attuned to your body's needs. And so you can maybe turn your cart around, so to speak, when you start feeling the anxiety well up or the burnout well up or depression or whatever it is that you might be feeling, the grief over your body changing. And instead of trying to think your way out of it with your head, you start to become better at practicing. Oh, when I start feeling X, Y, and Z in my body, that means it's time for a walk outside. That means It's time to lay on the floor, put my legs up on a chair and just kind of ground myself for 5-10 minutes, take some deep belly breaths, whatever that is. So that's really the framework that I walk both one-on-one clients through and, like I said, group participants through. And they're all rooted in the principles of intuitive eating, but I've just kind of like pared things down in a very like succinct set of practices to try. And of course, there's some individual quote unquote, homeworky type things, practices that people can go and try to help them implement these strategies, the savor strategies. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of how we get the work done, or at least develop a new practice.
You are speaking my language, just speaking my language of the awareness and the reflection. And I think so many people miss the step of reflection. And I love that it's so highlighted in your process. So if you want to work with Amanda, her website is alpinenutrition.org and her Instagram is at Alpine Nutrition. Her Instagram is fabulous. So I highly recommend. I'll have links in the show notes to all of those things as well. Do you have time for a couple rapid fire questions?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Okay. What is your favorite book?
I've been thinking about this one all day. It's a tough one. I will say, I don't know that I can say that I have a favorite, but I definitely like genres. I like historical fiction. Again, I was a history major. And I really do like the Outlander series. I mean, I'm young enough that I wasn't around when the books came out, but the story came out during COVID. I got introduced to it while my mom was going through cancer and a lot of stuff was going on in my life. So it was a nice escape with a good adventure to it. A little love story on the side. That's always nice. Hope for good quality relationships, intimate relationships in our lives. So that's probably my favorite book or series today. Anyway.
I'm in, I think, the fourth book. So I am too also newer to it and love it. Absolutely love it.
Awesome.
What are you currently reading?
currently, let's see, and I meant to grab the title of it. It's just over there. I've been reading both of Jenna Holenstein's book. She's another fellow on Diet RD, and she blends intuitive eating and meditation.
Ooh.
She has a new book out that I think is called Intuitive Eating for Every Day or something like that. And then her book prior to that, like I said, I'm totally blanking on the name on it, but it uses a balance between intuitive eating practice and Buddhism, which is I'm finding is a really interesting parallel because it's bringing in some of that mindfulness practice, a little bit of spirituality and like body spirituality piece. So it's an interesting twist on intuitive eating that I'm really liking. And I'm thinking that it applies a lot again to this midlife season.
I love that. What's one thing you know for sure?
Oh, that is a tough one because I don't know if we ever know anything for sure. What what I can say is that if you develop a set of practices for yourself, for whatever that is in life, whether that's feeding yourself, moving your body, connecting with people that matter to you, but think about it as a practice. I'm a big fan of that word. Think about practicing life versus doing life versus how you should be doing life. I think when we think about practices and that reflection piece, we can't really go wrong. You can't really screw up in life. You can learn some important lessons, but you can't screw anything up. So if that's one thing that I've learned both in my own individual story as well as helping so many women over these years and hearing what they've gone through, when we can shift our mindset into that idea of practicing instead of perfecting our lives or trying to achieve perfection and always following back on that reflective piece, like we can't go wrong in life. Life will be fine. Doesn't mean it'll be easy, but it'll be fine. You'll come out on the other end.
I love that. That's a really beautiful way of looking at it. Do you have a favorite quote, poem, something you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, one of my longtime favorite quotes is from John Lennon. It was during the Beatles, so I'll say John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And it's the tail end of one of their songs. I'm forgetting the song title. But the quote is, "The love you take is equal to the love you make." And that has resonated with me since high school, my piano, my theater, my drama days, and, being in love with the Beatles and everything that they did. And it just resonated with how I felt as a person. Again, like going back to that story of my high school friend that was the pole vaulter. Like I always felt like the more, not in a self, like not honoring my needs way. So don't misunderstand that. But the more that I could give to someone, the more that always came back to me. So whether that's being able to lend a hand or lend an ear or whatever. And that has continued with me throughout my whole life, whether it was my running career, whether it was other jobs I've had in nutrition, and obviously with my clients too. So yeah, the love you take is equal to the love you make is a pretty strong philosophy of mine.
Oh, well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I highly recommend you reach out, connect with Amanda. I'll have all the links in the show notes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Meg. This has been a pleasure.
I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you for listening. And if you loved this episode, will you please share it with a friend or two? Be sure to rate, review, and follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, so you're sure to never miss a single episode.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.